Welcome to Wade Trim's Innovation Alley. This is our inaugural podcast where we're going to cover a myriad of innovations and technology trends that affect not just our communities, the clients, our industry at large, but the world in general, right? I'm your host, Tim O'Rourke. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for Wade Trim. I'm in charge of Wade Trim's Office of Applied Technology, the organization within our structure where we foster innovation and advanced technologies. We're honored today to have some very important guest here with us. We'll introduce in a minute. But also my co-host. To my left here is Dave White. He's our wet weather practice lead, and Dave is very good at simplifying and making conversation out of very difficult and detailed technical topics. He's got a great way of connecting the dots, and he's a great co-host for me as we navigate through this journey we're going to take on these podcasts. Our first guest is a person that we met 8 or 9 months ago from EFCG. He's a partner, and he heads up their technology division, and it's Marcus Quigley. I'd like to have our guest today, Marcus, talk a little bit about himself and how we got engaged with you.
Sure. So Marcus Quigley, I'm a partner at the Environmental Financial Consulting Group, EFCG for short. And my background is I'm an engineer. Mm-hmm. So I spent most of my career in practice. And then following that, I founded a software company and ran that as CEO for 4 years before joining EFCG in 2019. EFCG has been around for 33 years. Mm-hmm. But in the last 3 years with my addition, we added in a technology advisory practice. So we've been really pleased to work with you, and we'll talk a little bit more about what all that means here, I think, in a few minutes. So it's great to be here, Tim.
Yes, great, and we're glad to have you. Yeah. Dave, would you like to add anything to the
Yeah, I'm just really excited to be here.
Initial start here?
Yeah, and have a chance to connect with Marcus and talk to him about these technologies of the future that we're so excited about learning more about at Wade Trim.
Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about how we came to meet and work with Marcus and why we have him as our first guest. We had developed, as I mentioned earlier, the Office of Applied Technology about 5 years ago as part of our strategic plan to create a forum and a process for fostering innovation and being able to implement these kind of strategies. And we thought we were doing pretty well with it. We had some hiccups and fits and starts as we went along this journey. And we got to a point where our next round of strategic planning was going to be this spring. And looking forward, I kind of had the sense, and working with Dave too, that we probably need to get a good benchmark of where we're at, not only with what we're doing and how we've set up this organization, but where we kind of rank with everyone else in the industry, and are we going through the right path? And then beyond that, and that's why we talked and engaged Marcus to do that, because Marcus has that objective kind of pulse of the industry beyond just what Wade Trim and our immediate world is seeing. But we also wanted to bring him in not just to take a look at where we were benchmarking against the industry, but where we needed to go in that next 5-year cycle. So that's kind of the overarching topics that we want to cover today in our first podcast. And so with that, Marcus, I'd like you to kind of talk your way through how you met Wade Trim and how we walked you through what we've done and where we're going, and how you helped us benchmark that from the industry standpoint.
Yeah, great, Tim. Well, first I would say I've known Wade Trim for a very long time. Mm-hmm. I spent most of my career in water resources, so there's kind of obvious overlap, yes, particularly in places like New York City, mm-hmm, here in Detroit, around the country. You guys have done some great work. So it's a company that I knew very well. It was really interesting to get to know you, though, in more detail internally, hear a little bit about the strategic plan.
Yep.
When we started talking, and particularly learn a bit about how the company has been organized, or I should say, after learning this story in more detail, mm-hmm, reorganized, and Tim. And we think about innovation and technology as being really facilitated by how you've structured things internal, yeah, to firms. So you'll probably tell it much better than I will, but I think it'd be really neat to talk a little bit about how you've gone through this evolution of developing a true matrix organization internal to Wade Trim. And then we can probably come back maybe a little bit too and talk about how that facilitates innovation. One thing I will say from the benchmarking perspective at EFCG, you've heard from me before,
Yep.
but your matrix design is very clean. And that the end result is that people know exactly where they sit, and that clarity really facilitates people being able to do their best work and to innovate and think creatively, because they know what that means in the organization.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit of the story about how you got to this place.
Yeah, so full disclosure, you had invited me to be a panelist on your technology leadership conference in New York City, about 2 months ago, right?
That's right.
And I was figuring I'd be up there with 3 or 4 other people and sharing ideas, and I realized when I got there that you're going to be by yourself up there, right? So you and I had a really good conversation about it, and we tried to kind of cover how we got to this at Wade Trim, and it was really cool to hear, for me anyway, that there were several other firms in the audience. Brown & Caldwell was one of them, right?
Right, sure.
That kind of went through a similar path and kind of had the same kind of challenges and fits and starts that we did. So the Office of Applied Technology and what we call our practice-led organization, which you refer to as the matrix,
Right.
has to work and weave with our operational organization that's worried about sales and profit, right? It's very hard to measure how a company's doing from a technological advancement perspective with
absolutely.
numbers.
Right.
It's more subjective, qualitative, and whatnot. So we had to create an environment that people understood what that practice-led organization was and how it would fit with the operational team. And actually, in Dave's previous life, before he became the wet weather practice lead, he was, like I was, the head of the water resources market segment, where we were measured by what, Dave?
Profitability.
And sales. And nobody was up at night worrying about, are we up to snuff on the innovations and how we measure against our competition from a technological standpoint. It all comes out in the wash with sales,
right,
and then ultimately
right.
profit.
Or you hope it does, right?
But who's staying up at night worrying about
Yeah, that's
that,
right.
right? And you and I kind of had that discussion in New York, and so I think one of the questions we got from the audience is, how did you become chief technical officer? And I said, I didn't aspire to be chief technical
Right,
officer.
right.
It kind of evolved with the partners that I grew up in this firm over the last 30 years, who could fill that role, and was it an important role, and would it have kind of a position of authority within the organization where people would aspire to advance in that side of our organization? And I think we're there. I think we're getting to that next level. And so anyway, Dave's previous life, maybe we could say a little bit about that as the water resources market segment. I tapped him on the shoulder and said, we need a lot of help here, because we're going to become this practice-led organization in this Office of Applied Technology, and I'm in charge of it, and I don't really have a team or an idea or a system in place beyond what I'm kind of thinking about myself.
Right.
And so Dave, why don't you talk a little bit about when you came on board with that and saw how we gave it some street cred and you put some organizational,
Yeah, sure. And Tim, like coming from that world where every day you're living, are we making the right amount of contribution margin? Are we making the profits? Right. Are we hitting the sales goals? And there's a dashboard, right, that lights up each month telling you, are you doing that? To thinking outside the box. Where are we going to be, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What are the technologies that Wade Trim provides as services that we do now that we need to do better, that we need to be more efficient at, and what are the ones we need to get into so that we stay relevant? Because if we don't understand artificial intelligence and machine learning, we're going to get left behind, and our sales are going to shrink, and we're not going to be heading in the right direction as a company. So for me, coming on board, I've always had a passion for technology. I grew up modeling, sewer flow and the largest sewer systems, in the country, and so I've always had the interest and the passion to kind of play in that space. And so to have the opportunity to kind of get back to that, to say, okay, where are we at? How are we evolving? And how can we build a whole organization that supports that with a CTO, an Office of Applied Technologies that's like a board of directors, right, that guides that with practice leads in each of our technology areas, and then fill that organization below them with technical leaders, and then have folks self-align and kind of sign up for, hey, this is an area that I'm very interested in, get on those teams, and then kind of build into an organization, like you said, that's thinking about how do we get into these neat and innovative things.
Yeah,
So
we
it's
thought
really
we thought it was
exciting.
really
Yeah.
interesting how you asked people what they wanted to do from a practice perspective. I think that's one of the things we talked about, Tim.
Yeah.
And I think it is fairly unique. We saw some other examples, as you pointed out. But what a way to get people aligned around where they want to head, instead of telling them, asking them what they want to partake in.
And as you recall, we kind of developed the practice lead kind of concept, and we said, okay, what are our practices? So what a practice is for us, and I think it applies to other firms as well, is it's what I call a bucket of technology that kind of fits in a kind of, these are all related, and you could identify them as, okay, this is a practice area. So for example, he's the wet weather practice lead. So that's where we deal with collection system response, CSO overflows, SSO overflows, et cetera, and we kind of created a huge engine with that background that we had here in Detroit and growing nationally. So if we said that was a practice, everyone in the market segments that we have kind of understood that. Right? That's clearly a practice. But we started with like 13 of them, as I told you, in New York.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And I don't want to get into what the individual ones were and how that made sense and didn't
Do you
make sense.
remember all 13, Tim? It's a lot.
I remember most of them, but if I
later.
actually tried to identify people to all of them, I just knew 13 was too many.
Lot, right? Yeah.
And as we were joking about at the conference, right, it was the office. I'm the chief technical officer. There's 4 other officers that kind of collaborate as we're doing this strategic plan implementation 4 years, and we came up with them with some cigars and scotches and did it the wrong way. And this was back when Dave was a market segment lead. Never really kind of understood, okay, how do I work with these 13 practices and still meet my metrics and worry about, what you're worried about, which is innovation and technology, and are we relevant? So we knew that we had to blow that up. Because it wasn't working, the market
couldn't even
weren't.
fill half the spots, right? Trying to find the people and grow that fast.
Right.
Which of the 13 are vacant?
You got a heartbeat. You're doing this one now, right? So, we knew that had to be blown up, and we had to get it right because you have one chance to get something like that right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we narrowed it down to 7 practice areas, and like I said, wet weather's one of them. We have collaborative delivery as a practice, which is more in the kind of design build and progressive design build and program management and that kind of collaborative delivery with clients. That's one of them. We got water, wastewater treatment kind of combined as a practice. Transportation's a practice. And we got a few others, and I don't want to go through all of them in the spirit of time, but once we developed those, people kind of understood, okay, I get what that is, and I understand how that affects our market segments. And our market segments are transportation, water resources, which we've already talked about, industrial, commercial, and energy, private type clients, and what we call municipal services, which is kind of the bread and butter stuff you do for municipalities. And as a practice had to be able to apply across all those market segments to have relevance and street cred, if you will.
Right.
And so the 7 that we ended up with, and there's one of them were just the business people of our organization. It can't just be about technology. We've got 100 and some people that work in that world, right? Accounting, marketing, branding, IT, all of that they have to have a home and a place to be too. So one of our tests was, let's take those 7 practices and put it to the test. We got 600 and some employees that have self-aligned, but let's have them, the rank and file basically go in into a web application and say, here's my primary practice, here's my secondary practice. And we got 95% participation from the rank and file, if you will, which that was great because that kind of everyone understands it and the participation's high and interest is high. But even better, from my standpoint, and I shared this with Dave too, is we've got good distribution. There isn't a practice that has 4 people and one that has 112.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's it ranged from like 20 to 50 depending on the practice, but it was
like
all
this
in
is
that.
what you would worry about, right? If you open it up to everybody.
Yeah, you can't have a practice if there's only 2 people in it.
Balance
right?
things out. Sure.
So that was great. And what you told us in New York was, that's really cool. I don't know that that's been a uniformly successful.
No, I think it's uncommon. I mean, there's the temptation to do everything kind of top down and dictate, assign people, and with limited success at times. Matrix organizations are difficult
They're tough,
to get everybody aligned around, and The example I give for Wade Trim, actually, and I've seen it in direct interactions with staff, is you can ask them where they sit and what that means.
And they know.
And it's critical for innovation and accelerating technology. We see it's core to what we do, but strategic planning and really being intentional at the corporate level about strategy, but then not doing it with a heavy hand. How do you use that soft power to motivate people to head in the right direction, to do true leadership? And it takes a lot of thought. When you get it right, I mean, what's funny about a more simplistic system, one that everybody understands, is actually hard to get there.
It is.
The simple answers are actually much more challenging.
Yeah, and like I said, you got to be able to admit when it isn't working. And
That's right.
You can't wait till the next strategic planning cycle and say we'll get it right then. So I think we're in a good place, and we did, Dave and I did, but we didn't know for sure. I mean, we wanted to say, okay, let's do some official benchmarking, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you talked about soft selling. And one of the original members of the OAT and one of the original kind of practice-led kind of champions, if you will, getting the word out, was our branding manager. So Dave, why don't you talk a little bit about Donna and what she's done for us in getting this soft sell, if you will, kind of word out, not just internally, externally, and
That's right.
And because if you don't have that, if you don't have communication at this level, it is always going to be, kind of a little behind.
Well, we and this is a consistent theme in our advisory work on strategy for innovation, is if there's anything to invest in, it's in getting the message right, getting communication out. And in fact, we advise on budgets that people spend as much on that part of what they do as they do on the actual innovation, which is really hard for engineers.
Yeah.
You say, hey, I need $100,000 to buy X piece of equipment or develop Y functionality, and then coming back in as a leader and saying, we're going to put as much into telling people about it as we are into the actual solution.
Yeah.
Pretty hard stuff, but it's been impressive.
And that's a
what you guys have
major
done.
corporate commitment to say,
That's right.
I'm not going to just fund the R&D or the investment in the software, hardware, or even pay for the labor to develop this.
That's right.
We got to get it out. We got to market it.
You do have to tell people about these
like
things.
I said at the conference, we don't write ourselves checks, right? I mean,
that's right.
the clients write our checks, and if they don't want to buy what we're selling, it ain't going to go anywhere. So
That's
it's
right.
a huge.
To have a professional branding manager come in and complement what we're trying to do. And you talked about, looking into a company that's focused on, hey, we got to make money, we got to get things done for our clients, but to have the ability to reach out and effectively communicate with people at all levels and get the message out, whether it's emails or updating your internal websites and newsletters, and then helping produce everything we do, whether it's this podcast or lunch and learns or town halls or presentations. You got to have that as a part of your team to get it out there. And so for us too, it's been not just focusing internally and building that up, but going externally to clients and to the industry and to our peers, and being able to get out there in conferences and effectively present a paper, present a topic.
Because the other part of our organization, beyond the practice-led organization, it's now partnering with the market segment leads for matching sales and profit with innovation and technology, is the actual identification of innovations. And this was a hit too at this conference too, right?
Absolutely.
That we developed a process, kind of like a Shark Tank, if you will, type process, where our practice leads sit on a committee, the OAT, the Office of Applied Technology, along with the branding manager, Don, as I mentioned earlier, and our IT manager. And we review ideas that come from the Wade Trim organization relative to innovation. And these ideas can be small.
Minivations.
Dave came up with this. He
Minivations.
came up with the Minovation tag. Very cool and cute. That's what Dave does well, as I said earlier.
Connect the dots.
And then the opposite of a Minovation is a
Megavation. It's bigger.
which means we're spending money, and
Right.
it better have a harder look at it, and we better have a ROI on that idea, return on investment. And then we came up with another acronym on the return on investment. We talked about this at the conference too. Is a RONI, and a RONI is
Not macaroni, but a return on non-investment.
So if you don't invest in this technology, we're going to talk about the 8 areas that we're focusing going for, because that's really going to be important as we look forward. is, will you lose market share? Will you lose revenue because you didn't keep
Got
up with
left
it?
behind.
You didn't keep up with the Joneses. You
Well,
didn't- you didn't
we
invest.
hear this a lot. I mean, people ask about ROI, and we put out numbers to show how investment in technology enhances the value of firms, and kind of the conventional metrics as well. But that opportunity cost is really this RONI component is significant as well, because there's the bottom isn't zero for what return on investment is. RONI is about, like, it can go lower than that, right? I mean, if you don't keep up, or you don't make the right choices. So prioritization is as important as deciding whether to do things. Like, what do? You can't do everything at once.
You can't,
particularly
I mean,
right now. So.
And you, as part of the benchmarking, so what should you be spending in net revenue on innovation, which has to include half of that's got to include the marketing side of it. So you do have somewhat limited resources unless you're going to be in that 5 to 6 to 8% investment, which really most firms can't.
Yeah, there's very few that are up in that range. There are a couple, but not very many.
Yeah. So but let's get back to the benchmarking real quick before we talk about the future. So I met Marcus electronically through an advanced email or a forwarded email I got from our CEO, Andy McCune, who said, why don't you follow up on this? And it was you contacting him through his contacts at AFCG, saying, would you at Wade Trim be interested in investing? I think it was ArcGen, kind of a subsidiary of one of our...
We're always looking, AFCG is always looking for partnerships between our clients. And so we reached out and said, I mean, one of the options for bringing innovation in is, using what others have done successfully and partnering. So that was the initial
You reached out to us for that, and I said,
do you want to hear more about this? Right?
And I'm talking to you. I call you because I don't just like talking on emails, right? And I said, okay,
I want to hear more. Let's talk about it.
Sounds like a good idea. Let's ArcGen thing is important. I think we need to talk through it. But you're EFCG, and I know what we use you for operationally, from staffing wise, and from kind of benchmark. You're kind of the standard in the industry of that.
Right.
And you're a guy that's head of technology part of this. So you're the consultant of consultants for technology.
That's right, yeah.
I think we're doing really well, but I don't know for a fact we're doing really well. Can you help us benchmark what we've done, where we're at, and kind of looking forward where...
And you said, by the way, we're revising the strategic planning process in 2 months. Can you get it done quickly? And
well,
sure, Tim.
Because I knew if I said, let's squeeze it to 2 months, a lot's going to happen in a hurry, and that's kind of how I operate. But
a lot, yeah.
And you did. I mean, you literally... we were talking 6, 7, 8 weeks to get that benchmarking done, and then kind of midway through that, we said, okay, this is for the strategic plan, so let's talk about what technologies, if it comes up in the strategic plan we're going to do, that we would want to invest in, go to that level of detail if it happens to come up. Now, it didn't turn out to come up at that level of detail, but that was the exercise. That's what we tried. So Marcus, ultimately through this 8-week whirlwind where we told you, take a look back, tell us where we're at, and help us focus on what we should be looking forward in the next 5, 10, 15 years technologically. That was the mission, if you chose to accept it, and you did. So why don't you walk our audience here through that 8-week period, how that went about, and how we ended up where we are today.
I mean, so I'd start out saying, I mean, this is the common problem inside firms, is not that you don't know what the options are, but what to prioritize. And so we really start out normally focusing on how the company generates revenue. More than anything else, it's easy to dream up all kinds of technical shiny objects to potentially pursue, but every firm's different. How you generate revenue, what's important, what your values are, why your clients actually engage with you. We asked those questions really specifically, and so coming into this prioritization task, we really wanted to think about those things that are going to advance the position of Wade Trim. It's one thing to disrupt, but I think there's a common myth that that's kind of like the path to innovation. And it really, in our industry, you look back, it's an evolution. Things don't happen overnight in civil engineering. And it's really where strategy comes in. So we dove in and we focused on 8 areas. I mean, which is maybe a few more than I like to have, frankly. But we wanted to look at themes. In the same way, frankly, the company's organized, right? You want to have kind of umbrellas around themes that help you think through a whole broad set of associated ideas. And so we picked out 8, and I'd probably turn over to Dave to talk a little bit about kind of what came out of the process. But it's evolved, and you're working toward the tactical components as well as strategic now as the next step.
So as always happens, I get responsibility to develop these 8 that we came up, and then I delegate it to Dave.
Yeah, that's right.
And say,
that's
okay,
right.
your goals
That's
are
what
my
I'm turning
goals,
into.
Right.
my goals are your goals.
What do we do with this?
How do we prioritize these in setting up for the strategic plan that we have? So why don't you walk our audience through the what they are and how we organize them and where we're going to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, we got an amazing report back from Marcus that went through these 8 technology areas and really drilled into areas that we were actually maybe doing some things in now, maybe some opportunities that we could find there, and helped kind of benchmark and describe what those were. I kind of looked at it and I said, I'm not sure what this is. I kind of reframed it kind of in my own words, and kind of loosely around how we do projects. How do you interface with a client? How do you get data? How do you plan and evaluate? How do you design? And then how does this all come together? So the 8 that are really there, the first one, dashboards and digital delivery. We've all spent a lot of time the last few years.
So explain what that is for an average person that doesn't.
So I'll give my take on it, and then maybe I'll hand it
Marcus.
over to
Yeah,
Marcus
sure.
to kind of drill down into that. But we've all been home like these last few years, or a lot of us have been, working on projects, trying to communicate, and people have become very comfortable with interacting, online. And so the natural evolution of bringing information in, creating a dashboard, being able really to have round-the-clock access to information on projects or where things sit or how you're doing on a task is something that people are very comfortable with, and we could see evolving in the future. So that could be one of the primary ways that your clients could check in on a project.
Yeah, we see this across the industry, that companies are thinking about how to better serve their clients and provide value around deliverables in particular. And a lot of information changes much more quickly than the traditional process of kind of taking things in, producing a report, putting a PDF together and sending it out in email. So giving clients the option to engage through a portal or to look at dashboards, as you said, Dave, is something that a lot of clients are asking for. And frankly, the whole industry has kind of headed that direction. Not overnight, but we really wanted to position Wade Trim well to think about how to get there.
Yeah,
And
as we were
stay a little
building-
bit ahead.
Yeah, as we were building that, you're explaining it to me, and it's like the experience.
That's right.
Beyond
That's
just
right.
being the trusted advisor, it's that next level experience the client could have.
Well,
Right,
and you map it back to like why Wade Trim, right?
Right,
And it's that you are responsive, that you're trusted, that you're available. All those things map into improving that client experience,
Exactly.
which is maybe not how engineers talk about things, right? But
Not
probably
always,
a new way to think about it.
Experience and technology are not always used in the same sense.
That's right. That's right.
So that's one.
Yep. That's the first one.
Number 2 is, Dave?
Yeah, so the second one, so you've got your project set up, you've got a way to communicate that, but every project we do has a lot of data, right, that's out there, and how do you collect that data? In the old days, you might have a surveyor, drive out there and shoot a few points, write it down in a notebook. Now, I mean, the way you collect this information, a fleet of drones by air, land, and sea, remote satellites, and all that information is out there, different levels of accuracy. How do you bring it in? How do you make sense of it? How do you collect that efficiently? That's right. Kind of this advanced data collection, and where are things going with that?
And Dave, our first major investment in the hub was in this space. It was, right, the Navis.
Yeah, with the reality capture, and some of those devices. Jason Yaskovitz and Brian Gombos, Neil Wakeman, have been really kind of working this stuff the last few years and are getting into it. I feel like we've got a little bit of a leg up.
Yeah, we did. We actually did some benchmarking specifically of the firm to some peers about how you talk about this, and how you've kind of been thought leaders, and you did quite well, particularly around things like reality capture. But yeah, there's a lot of different channels that we have now to collect data in novel ways. There's always the traditional means and methods as well, but getting people comfortable with using all those different forms, and then upskilling, being able to be very flexible about using data that's coming in as a feed or through an application programming interface, an API, which is how the modern internet services talk to one another.
Yeah.
Just getting all of that seamlessly from new types of sources, and then meeting technology, external technology providers where they're at and where they're headed. So I think we've at least started positioning the firm well strategically around all of those things.
Yeah, and so that feeds obviously one of the other technologies that we have in digital twins and model-based design, because that's kind of the framework of feeding into that, the life of a project. So Dave, why don't you talk about that and some of the next technology?
Yeah, so I mean the next couple technologies I think kind of play well together, which would be data science and optimization. And so now you've got a ton of this information, it's coming in. How do you make heads or tails of it? How do you manage it? Is it up in a cloud somewhere? How do you run statistical algorithms to create a value understanding of what that data is trying to tell you? And then now that you have all this data and you're trying to figure out where do you go with the project, maybe you're doing a planning study, you want to find the best possible answer for the client. So you want to optimize that. And in the old days, you'd have a bunch of smart engineers kind of come up with a half dozen ideas and kind of get to the right answer using perhaps engineering judgment.
Right.
Now with these new tools, you're running hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of combinations of possible ways to solve the problem.
That's right.
And how do you pick the best answer? No stone left unturned.
Yeah,
So,
the ultimate optimal solution based on
optimization.
algorithmic.
Right.
Yeah, so exploring all that, we call it decision space, right?
Yeah.
I mean, about how you're looking at different alternatives, and then doing that with very, very large data sets. So the challenge for firms in the industry is that some of the skills associated with using just, literally just larger sets of data are different. You can't just open them up as spreadsheets and run some calculations. You have to, use more sophisticated, even, direct coding to do the analysis of some of the underlying data sets. And then it unlocks a lot of value. I mean, you mentioned AI and machine learning.
Yep.
When you start having so much information coming back, you can start using that in more novel ways that are, leveraging the, all of this rich data that we have a hard time figuring out what it all means otherwise.
And I think of the power of it because I've done a lot of planning, alternatives analysis.
Yeah.
I actually did a paper on decision science 20 years ago.
That's right.
That
What's old is new.
It was more about packaging the alternatives that you were
That's right.
developing and comparing them numerically, but not with algorithms and not with, okay, let's not just measure the alternatives against each other. Let's optimize the development of the alternatives.
That's right.
And let it solve itself. That was the next step, and I've been pretty impressed with what we've done with Optimatics and what Dave's doing in that.
Yeah, that's
All right, Dave, so keep going. We're almost at the midway point here.
Well,
right?
I mean, so the next three to me are closely tied together. It gets into that design area. So how do we design a project? How do you lay it out so that it's going to work and you can put together a set of biddable plans and documents or however you do that, and so it can be built. The first is advanced design. So what are the tools? Civil 3D. People are talking about 3D design. BIM is pretty commonplace right now, and Revit for facilities. But let's talk 4D. Let's talk 5D. Let's talk about time and space in addition to designing a model of a project, not just on a piece of paper. Where is that going, and where do we need to be there? And then this whole concept, the next technology is the industrial metaverse. So metaverse, what is that? You've heard about
he came up with that
Zuckerberg,
name,
right?
Yeah.
Zuckerberg's out there. It's no longer just Facebook. You're in the metaverse, and in there you're in an alternate reality. But picture a reality where we're designing things, the projects that we design every day, in a living world, like a game engine, like a video game, and all the equations you learned about in school and your textbooks live in that digital world, and you can test your design in that space and see what happens. And then the last technology that links to that is, okay, we design something, it gets built, but then that facility, that project continues to live on with the asset management and the operational aspects for clients. How do they continue? So it's like a living project. So that's three technologies in one.
Yeah, I think that's right. The it's tempting when you say something like industrial metaverse to think, oh, like disruption again, but it's really all these things, like you said, come together, Dave, as an evolution of where we're headed. You can see this place. It's very close to where we are, where there aren't plan sets. where you're going out and designing things, and there's literally just a digital version of the thing that's going to get built. There's a digital version of the existing conditions, and all the pieces in between, facilitating the construction as well as design. It's a little bit further out, but there are places that you're starting to touch that. Wade Trim is doing Revit-based design, is doing the Civil 3D for site grading, and those are these pieces, but they all come together in digital twin or industrial metaverse, where you've got live data, you've got design information, you've got information coming from people, where the design documents become the platform for long-term asset management as well. So we see this all coming together, accelerating the pace of design, looking at more alternatives, and then interestingly, from a business perspective, for engineering consulting firms to extend the relationship beyond just the ribbon cutting. We think about asset management as if it's something different than design right now. I think some of those lines will really start to get blurred. Excitingly, those turn into long-term relationships as well.
Right.
These digital assets have to be maintained in the same way that physical ones do. So there's a lot of opportunity.
And it is funny because, the challenge with all of this stuff is you're looking out into the future about where we need to be 5, 10, 15 years from now, not necessarily where we need to be today.
Right.
And I've actually had conversations with young engineers that are completely versed at BIM technology, Revit, 3D that you just mentioned, and say, but how would that apply today to the project I'm working on now with that client named blank?
Right, and many of them want a 2D drawing, like that's what they're paying
and
for.
I can't even begin to understand all the technology advancements they've gotten just being able to build these models in literally minutes. I can see some of these young engineers build. I describe something and I see a model of it within an hour, which is fantastic and amazing to me. But you can't look at what's the restriction of it today. You got to look at it's going to evolve. And what we were talking about the leadership conference, it's rare when a client's actually driving the innovation to the providers as much as it kind of evolves organically.
If that's where you are, that's not a great place.
If your client's telling you need to do this, that means you're already behind it.
That's right.
And so there are the innovators, and then there's the keeping up on that wave. But that's kind of what looking at those 8 that we're talking about here today. For me, as I kind of get older, as you can see, obviously, is 5, 10 years is about how far I can look out in my career and think I can see a change. I can see the purpose of it. And when you're listening to the technology, the first thing you have to have in your mind as a client service manager or a provider, as a consultant, is how would this apply to this client's needs into the future, not just today. And there's a lot more they apply today, but how are they going to use this 5 years from now?
Right.
And how do we get that process? And what you noticed about, I think, our culture is that we are kind of considered trusted advisors and have great relationships. So part of that relationship is, give me the advice on this thing I don't understand. Remember we were talking about...
And debunking things, right? I mean, like the last thing you want to be is in a position of selling something that isn't real.
Somebody's pitching this technology to me and making me feel like I don't understand it, makes me feel a little bit insecure as a client. Where you're the trusted advisor, you tell me. Well, that means by definition, we better have a position on this.
That's right.
And we better understand it to a point where we see the value and we can advance it with them.
Well, that's one of the things
we
talked about is, in the prioritization and the strategy associated with that,
Yep.
is that you don't have to be, the firm that delivers all of the detailed underlying technology.
Yep.
But as a trusted advisor, you better understand all of it and be at the absolute forefront of the thought leadership in it, which Wade Trim has always been there. Like, this is how the company was formed. That's how you created your reputation.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean you have to do everything, and you can't do everything.
Yes.
So that's working with others, and you've got a lot of partners, but knowing when it's real, when it's not real. Is machine learning different than statistical analysis? Why?
Building on that, Marcus, you kind of coined a frame, a 3-word system to us that kind of makes obvious sense when you say it to yourself, but build, borrow, or buy.
Exactly.
As we're looking at these technologies, and you're right, we can't be the industry leader in all 8 of these things that Dave just talked about.
That's right.
I mean, not to call anyone out, but I don't know of any firms that are the industry leader in all 8 of them.
Well, and frankly, if you, on the build, borrow, buy continuum, there is no one who can build all of it.
Right.
And this is even true, you could pick the largest technology
So describe
firms.
build, borrow, buy for the audience.
So build, borrow, and buy, the default for engineers is to build things, right?
Right.
You think of something interesting to do, wade trim,
Put our
all
logo
these
on it,
firms.
patent it, and
You've got some of those brilliant engineers in the world, right? You literally can build anything, just about, right? I mean, with the staff you have. The challenge is, it takes a lot of capital, it takes time, it's distracting from the core business model, and you may not be able to support it long term. One of the CEOs that we had at our annual CEO conference described it well, that companies in the engineering consulting business are really good at V0 and V1, not so good at like version 2, 3, 4, 5, and the long-term, technology support side of things. Because what does that mean? You're really close to the clients. You understand exactly what their needs are. Most technology companies, pure technology companies, don't have that kind of understanding and relationship. So you've got something really special to be able to create why things are important, understand when they apply, but the actual building, the thing you want to do, is really, really hard. And there are also a bunch of people who are willing to spend their own capital and be hyper-focused on building some of those things. So the other 2 pieces of that, the borrow and buy component, are where we tend to look, or advise firms look, to really accelerate their technology and innovation strategy, which is there something I can take off the shelf, maybe leverage my business position and relationship to be able to use those things maybe even more effectively than the companies that deliver them, and then set up partnerships. Understand those technologies really well. Maybe have more than one that you have a partnership with, so you're not like picking winners and losers necessarily. But buy is sometimes you just you go to a vendor, you buy stuff,
take it off the shelf.
You figure out exactly how to apply it and you use it. The borrow strategy is about coming up with kind of unique offerings, some maybe white labeling a commercial off-the-shelf solution with some customization. That's been done a long time in our industry, but it's been really successful as a strategy. So we have advised but many firms to think about like how do you keep that key position as thought leadership, leading in technology, but not building everything.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, if you're living in the we're going to build it all ourselves world, it's very expensive.
Very expensive, yeah.
And you and I have talked about this a lot of times with clients, right? That a lot of times when we're hit with a technology that's an innovation, the first human nature part of it is resistance.
Yeah.
Show me where this has worked, and show me why it values me, and show me, there's a lot of effort into that. And so we employ the borrow buy quite a lot.
That's right.
We are not avoiding the building process, but we want to.
You build when you have to, right? I mean, that's the key.
The fact is, there's a lot of great engineering firms and entities and resources out there. We can't, be the ones that build everything, and nor can any firm out there, right? So, Dave, you're working on one that's my consideration of borrow is that what you're doing with Confluency and the partnership there, as we're kind of building something there with them. So, why don't you describe that?
Yeah, so I mean that's an exciting area that we've been, getting into the last few years. It's in the optimization space, right? And what are the software technologies that you can get off the shelf, and then how can you effectively use those, build digital interfaces so it'll talk to the right models, so you get the right answers on projects. Right. So yeah, we reached out in our organization. We found people that had some of those existing relationships with the specialty firm Confluency. Tim Coleman had some connections there and put us in touch with Mason Thronberg.
Former CH2 and 2M Health partnership between the two of them.
And we sat down, we talked about what we were trying to do and how we could collaborate together and meet on a regular basis, and it's worked really well, and it's led to some great project wins and some great technology transfer and training of our staff. So it's a non-competitor.
So they're hyper-focused. They're hyper-focused on one thing, and they're like putting everything they've got into that. And,
so that's where these partnerships are fantastic, because you can outsource that, right, and then work together in a partnership. And Dave's got an ROI on this, so we're measuring whether this is going to ultimately be worth the investment, and no pressure. So we were talking about kind of prioritizing these technologies. So we came up with a coin phrase called TAPS, right? And that was the technology action plan for all 8 of them. We assigned a practice lead and a support team for all 8. And Dave's actually the lead on a couple of them, I believe.
That's right.
And we want to see an action plan that advises Wade Trim, whether it be build, borrow, buy, or whether it be this is an area where you got to get into, whether it's a RONI or a return on investment to be what the Joneses, and we need to make a serious, calibrated investment in that. So Dave's actually presenting these 8 technologies and the status of these TAPs to the board tomorrow, and delegated that to him. I hope he doesn't screw it up because
do that.
But it's part of the what we're going to be doing over the next few months as we get into 2023, which is the first year of that strategic planning cycle we had talked about earlier. What of the 8 are we going to be major players in? What are we going to look for opportunistic response to? And what we might say, hey, look, on the buy side, it's being developed heavily. You need to play in the space, but you don't need to be investing hugely in developing this if it's already being kind of advanced to that point.
They're really hard. It's easy to envision being way out in front, but it's hugely capitally intensive. And like you said, clients don't necessarily need all of that stuff.
They're not
so it's how do you stay just ahead on exactly what is needed, leveraging what's happening kind of more broadly across society, all kinds of forces external to our business that are driving that pace. But that's the fun part, right? I mean, with these TAPs, to figure out what is that roadmap. When do you decide to layer in additional technologies and skill sets, or enhance things that you're already doing a lot of things great.
And so we got these 8, and I'm going to ask each of you. We're going to have different opinions, I think. If you had to pick 2, advising Wade Trim, and I'm going to ask him the same question because he's actually probably going to get that question. He's probably going to get that question at the board. No, well, you can't change your answer. Maybe you already have your answer. Maybe he should leave the room. You'd give your 2, and then we bring him back in. But why don't we start with you, Marcus? Because you were kind of the one that helped us develop these, and you've got not strong opinion, but you got clear opinions on it. And why don't you say if you had to pick 2, and you know Wade Trim well enough to know what our culture and what our background is.
I turned to looking.
Doesn't mean we're going to do them.
That's right. I know. I think you will. I mean, so but if you don't, the market will pull you along anyway. But the 2 I would pick are getting really good at this web service integration exercise. So that's number 1, and the other one is remote sensing. So I'll describe the web service thing because it's not completely self-explanatory, which is when you're talking about digital delivery, when we're talking about industrial metaverse or digital twins. When you kind of drill behind the scenes, what that really is a firm getting great at taking information that is published in via APIs, which are application programming interfaces, how the internet interacts between different types of services, and then turning those into engineering deliverables, meeting the client's needs. That's really focused on modernizing what it means to actually be an engineer. Maybe this is an abstraction of what consulting engineering is, but you're taking information in, you're processing it in some way, you're adding value to it, and then you're sending it back out into the world. Complete abstraction, right? But right now and historically, there are all these manual steps, like you're bringing data in and then you're translating it into another format, and then you're putting it into another tool to maybe do some modeling, you're pulling it back out, you're presenting it, you're writing some prose around it. So this is kind of how engineering consulting has evolved, right? And we're seeing, like, if it's digital field data collection, if it's taking a Revit model and using it for asset management, all of those manual steps starting to disappear. And what it does is surfaces the things that engineers are actually the most excited about, not manually manipulating data and reformatting it so it can work in another tool, but thinking about the value of it. It really elevates our whole profession, it elevates what the company does, and it creates new value for a client. I mean, do clients really want to be paying you hours to manually manipulate data? Not if they can help it, right? They want to use your brains.
They want to use your ideas and your problem solving. Yeah.
So that's very exciting. On the remote sensing side, there are these externalities to our industry that are just stunning in their pace. We're launching more satellites per year now than we had launched in the entirety of human history
Up to this
before
point?
2018.
Yeah.
So whether it's remote sensing, we'll see in the next 5 years, you'll be able to get 30 centimeter resolution data at 15-minute intervals for the entire Earth. And you think about, okay, what am I going to do with that? I can watch actual vehicles move around
Kind of
the
mind-blowing
site.
when you think
It
about
really
it.
is.
Yeah,
So I think
yeah.
we're just even scratching the surface. There are other types of sensing like synthetic aperture radar. We go out, we monitor floods. You can monitor the entire United States looking at the water surface elevation of every water body. Like that's where we're going to get. So staying on top of being able to use those types of data sources very effectively.
Again, to use your mind, you're solving problems instead of
that's right.
managing data.
Yeah, instead of going out and like reading water levels or taking,
Yeah.
like we spent,
Yeah.
I spent the summer of 1993 doing like HEC 2 surveys of a stream bed for 3 mile sections. It'd probably take, like a week now to do that well with the DEM.
Where before it was exhausting.
Yeah, this is actual survey with machetes
Yeah.
and things, right? So,
Yeah, and you can get
absolutely.
ticks and all kinds of other things.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
you got to go out in the field. It's pretty
Yeah.
fun. The other thing, like on satellites, you've seen it in Ukraine. The changes kind of come to the surface when there's dire need, but the role that remote sensing has played there. Also, the connectivity.
Yeah.
Starlink. I think 45,000 satellites are going to be launched in the next couple of years just for that. So like we have all of these thoughts about Internet of Things and connectivity, and they seem like technical problems. A lot of that stuff's going to evaporate. It's going to feel like everything is connected worldwide in a very effective way.
And everything can be seen. Yeah.
That's right. And
Yeah.
so I think that changes what it means to be an engineering firm.
Yeah.
Changes the types of analyses you'll have to do. And it's exciting, but it's not going to happen overnight. You can evolve.
Scary and exciting at the same
Yeah,
time, right?
exactly.
It is, yeah. So
We have
those-
all questions about what this is going to mean
So
for
these are the
society.
two main areas that you see.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think, Dave?
I mean, what Marcus says makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of interplay between these technologies. I mean, I guess what I go back to is I remember when I first started, the big thing was GIS. And everybody like, oh, we got this map and with data, and we could add the manhole elevation and the length of pipe. And it was amazing. We're populating with all this data and putting it in there. And I was always like, what do you do with that data? Like, what's next, right? And now we're just at the point where billions and billions of data points are feeding what we know about projects and sites and infrastructure. And so I feel like, my picks are data science and optimization. How do you handle all that data that's coming in? How do you understand it, make use of it, create value to a project, have a good handle on that, and then how do you optimize and use that information to save money on a project or for your clients or for the residents that have to pay for it? So being able to be a master of those tools, and we have a saying in the modeling group, at Wade Trim, it's not the model, it's the modeler. And so we've got really great people that can think about these things, and so if we can give them those next generation tools and be a master of that, I think that's
Because sometimes
right
it is the
place we need to
model,
go.
right? It is the model.
Sometimes it is the model.
Yeah, so that's great. I mean, the reality of it all is that I don't think we can ignore any of the 8 and say we'll never play in a space, we'll never react to it, we'll never give advice about it if asked by a client. We got to understand them, and we got to understand that there's an evolution within these areas that I think we've jointly decided is going to happen in our industry, whether we are fully on board or at the head of it or not.
Right.
So it'll play itself out. Like I said, Dave's doing this presentation tomorrow to the board. We're going to prioritize the 8 and kind of where we want to do over the next 5 years as we build this strategy. And like I said, it's exciting. I mean, I'm looking towards retirement by the time that's all over. Kind of look back.
Things move pretty fast these days.
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
You
it's
never know.
scary. I remember being the
Things
kid.
will change.
Who's the
That's
kid?
right.
But anyway, that's kind of where we got to this point, right? And that's why you're our first guest, because you helped us navigate that and get us positioned for the next 5 years. So, Dave, why don't you talk about the last of the 8, the smart cities?
So we technically hit on 7 of the 8 technologies as we were going through that, but most of the first 7 to me kind of relate to a project. Okay, how do you work on a project? How do you get it done? And it's one component of a much bigger universe, right? A community, a town, right? That comes together. And so, how does that project fit in that road design, that sewer, that water line that's delivering, flow to your house. But how does it all talk together, take advantage of technology within the confines of a smart city? What is a smart city? How do we put that all together and understand that? Where is that really going for communities?
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that we anchor on too is, hey, we're civil engineers. It's about people, right? I mean, bringing it all together is about creating great places to live, having infrastructure that functions, being resilient to disasters and uncertainty. And I think, although it's buzzwordy at times, smart cities is really where that comes together, is around the experience for people and what it means for
And
your
it's
clients.
such a huge topic, because if you think all the data that a community is dealing with, and who can collate it all into one kind of operational support for the whole entire city, it's a big topic.
It's externally facing. I mean, the difference between doing like dashboards for clients and then smart cities is you're talking about the public, you're talking about people, talking about the outcomes, not something more narrow about executing a capital improvement plan or looking at a number of alternatives around a project. It's about living our lives in these urban spaces and how that.
You do sound excited about it. You do. I mean, that's good. That's good. That's what you do. I mean, that's
Yeah, that's right.
So this has been great, not only working with you, but getting us to this point, ready to see the future. So we're coming up to kind of the closing time here of our first podcast, right? Why don't you give us some closing remarks, Marcus, and then I'll let Dave follow up, and then I'll
think
send it off.
the key thing for me is it's really important what you guys are doing, is as being thoughtful as an organization about where things are headed, and then being intentional about how to build your company to be able to deliver that value to clients. So there are a lot of organizations that have kind of gotten by on grassroots or entrepreneurial, technology and innovation. I think we're in a different place, particularly because of the pace of change, because of the number of opportunities and technologies that are showing up in the marketplace, and the capabilities of the staff,
Right.
and then also the scale and the importance of things like partnership at a corporate perspective. I just wrap up saying, like, you guys are headed in the right direction. Doing a process that's thoughtful, knowing when to pivot, change your strategy, reacting is what it means to be a leader in our industry, and you've exemplified that. So it's great to work with the company.
A lot more to do.
Yeah, we're
a lot more
excited
to
about
do.
where it's headed.
Yeah.
Yep.
So thank you for that. I mean, like I said, it's been a pleasure working with you, and you've gotten us into a position, I think, where we need to be going forward. So,
Great.
Dave, do you have any closing thoughts before we?
I'm just excited, kind of echoing what Marcus said about where we're at with being able to put the right structure in place, the right tools and techniques and support to really keep our eyes open to the industry and these things that are changing so rapidly. And so to have that there and be looking for these ideas and then being able to evaluate them and decide, gosh, what do we need to do with this? Do we need to get on this? Do we wait? Do we hold? We're looking for that every day now. And it's really fun to look around the company and see everybody kind of starting to think that way, because at an engineering firm, it's easy to kind of just get into your rut. Like, I got to design this sewer, I got to lay this McDonald's out or whatever, and not realize, wow, there's a different way of doing that, and we've got to be on top of that. Yeah. So really excited to be able to collaborate with you, Marcus, and having the opportunity to do that.
Great.
So
I've known Dave since he was a U of M grad.
just this
He
tall.
just started. He's like, he was 4'3". Just had started. So I've seen his whole arc, how he got to where he's at, and some of the challenges that we've all seen as we've grown, nationally from our Michigan base. So on behalf of Marcus Quigley, our first guest in our initial podcast, and my co-host Dave White, I, Tim O'Rourke, would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And what we want to accomplish with all of this is having conversations like this as we look at the myriad of topics going forward, so that we do insights for ourselves, but also reaching out to what we're seeing out in the industry and our competition and our client base and the communities at large, right? So this has been fun. Actually, I'm actually excited about these podcasts because, I'm going on 40 years of doing all this, and I'm actually excited about this because it's actually fun, and I like having. I'm a conversationalist anyway, so I've enjoyed this, and I look forward to our upcoming podcasts. The next one we're going to do is cybersecurity.
Cybersecurity.
With our internal IT folks tackling that. And you guys covered that at that Technology Leadership Conference, how serious that issue is, not just for us, but for everyone in our country and the world. And then we're going to also talk about topics such as climate change, model-based design, et cetera. So we've actually got 18 topics identified. I'm not sure if we're going to cover them all in sequence or add or take away, but having a guest like you is important, and I appreciate your insights. So with that,
That's great. Thank you so much.
safe travels back to Boston. We'll see you on the East Coast.
See you around.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.